Paris, October 2023. One of the most famous and debated cabarets in the world is hosting a pop star from Southeast Asia, someone who has just completed a world tour with one of the biggest bands on the planet. The performance is not a concert. It is not a press appearance. And for many people watching from thousands of miles away in Seoul, South Korea, it is not something they expected to see from someone in her position. The reaction is immediate, divided, and deeply revealing. Because the woman on that stage is not just a pop star. She is, according to her record label, her marketing, and the industry that built her, a K-pop idol. And K-pop idols, for most of the industry's history, do not do things like this. So what exactly happened in Paris? And how did one woman's decision to step onto that stage become a flashpoint for one of the most complicated tensions in modern pop culture? The answer goes back much further than one night in Paris. It goes back to a system, a very specific, very deliberate system, that has produced some of the most successful music acts on the planet, while asking the people inside it to trade away more than most Western fans fully understand. Her name is LALISA Manobal. Most of the world knows her simply as Lisa. She is Thai-born, globally renowned, and by most objective measures, one of the most recognizable pop stars alive. As a member of Blackpink, the South Korean girl group that became the first K-pop act to headline Coachella, the first to top global streaming charts. Simultaneously, and one of the most followed musical acts in the history of social media, Lisa sits at what should be an uncomplicated apex of success. But the story of how she got there and what it has cost to remain there is far more complicated than a highlight reel suggests. K-pop is often described simply as a music industry. That framing is technically accurate but profoundly incomplete. The Korean pop industry is more precisely a talent management ecosystem, one built on long-term contracts, intensive training programs, meticulous image, construction, and a set of behavioral expectations that would be considered extraordinary and in many countries legally unenforceable, almost anywhere else in the world. To understand why Lisa's story matters, not just to her fans but to anyone interested in how power, culture, and celebrity intersect, you need to understand the world she entered. And you need to understand what it means to be a foreigner inside that world. If this kind of deep dive storytelling is what you come here for, subscribing means you will not miss what comes next in this story, because it is still being written. Act 1. The system, or the K-pop idol system, did not emerge accidentally. It was engineered, deliberately and methodically, over the course of roughly 3 decades, beginning in the early 1990s when South Korean entertainment companies began studying the American and Japanese pop markets and asking a deceptively simple question: what if talent could be developed at scale? The answer became what we now recognize as the idol training system. Young people, sometimes teenagers, sometimes younger, are recruited through auditions held globally. Once signed, they enter multi-year training contracts during which they receive instruction in singing, dancing, language, acting, and media presentation. Many are housed and in some cases schooled by the company. The agency absorbs those costs. In return, it takes a significant percentage of future earnings, controls the artist's public image, and retains final say over projects, public presentation, and, in many documented cases, who the artist may or may not be seen with romantically. Dating bans, formal prohibitions against publicly disclosing romantic relationships, have been a standard feature of idol contracts for much of the industry's history. The rationale, rarely stated explicitly but well understood within the industry, is rooted in what Korean entertainment executives have long referred to as parasocial investment. The emotional attachment fans feel toward an idol is more commercially durable when that idol appears unattached. The economics are documented, and the behavioral restrictions imposed to protect those economics have been challenged in South Korean courts on multiple occasions, with results that have, in recent years, increasingly favored the artists. YG Entertainment, the label that signed, trained, and launched Blackpink, occupies a specific and influential position within this landscape. Founded in 1996 by Yang Hyun-suk, a former member of one of Korea's pioneering idol groups, YG built its reputation on acts with a harder edge than its competitors, heavier production, stronger hip-hop and R&B influence, and a brand identity that positioned its artists as more streetwise, more authentic than the clean-cut idols associated with rival companies. Blackpink, which debuted in 2016 after years in development, was YG's flagship girl group. They were conceived as global from the beginning: English-language social media presence, international collaborations, a sound engineered to cross borders. But global in YG's framing did not mean ungoverned. It meant internationally marketed, while still operating under the same fundamental contractual and behavioral architecture that governed every idol at every company in the Korean industry. And into that architecture, YG placed someone who was already, in one very important sense, an outsider. Lisa was born in 1997 in Buriram, a province in northeastern Thailand. She began dancing competitively as a child and, at the age of 14, traveled to Seoul to audition for YG Entertainment. She passed. She became the only non-Korean trainee accepted from her audition group that year. She spent 5 years in the training system before Blackpink's debut in 2016. To be a non-Korean idol in the Korean pop industry is to navigate a specific and rarely discussed set of pressures that exist alongside the standard pressures every idol faces. Language is the first and most persistent. Korean is the industry's default operating language, and for a Thai teenager arriving in Seoul with limited Korean proficiency, every rehearsal, every management meeting, every media appearance is filtered through a linguistic and cultural barrier that the idol must overcome while simultaneously perfecting dance routines, learning vocal arrangements, and conforming to expectations that were not formed around her. According to multiple interviews and reported accounts over the years, Lisa has spoken about the loneliness of those early training years, about learning to navigate a culture that was not hers, adapting her speech, her mannerisms, and her public presentation to the requirements of the industry. All of this while remaining, in the eyes of a significant portion of Korean audiences, irreducibly foreign. That foreignness would become, simultaneously, her greatest commercial asset and the source of her most persistent industry tensions. Act 2. The tension points? Or, by 2021, Blackpink was one of the most followed musical acts on the planet. Lisa, within the group, had accumulated a fan base that rivaled, and by some social media metrics exceeded, that of the group itself. When YG announced individual solo releases for each member, the anticipation surrounding Lisa's was substantial. In September of that year, she released LALISA, a single that debuted at #1 in multiple countries and broke the record for the most viewed music video by a solo K-pop artist in its first 24 hours. It was, by any measure, a commercial triumph. But something in the execution of that solo era quietly signaled what was coming. LALISA did not sound like Blackpink. It did not sit within the aesthetic grammar of YG's group identity. It was louder, more confrontational, and more explicitly rooted in Lisa's individual identity, including overt references to her Thai heritage that had rarely been foregrounded in Blackpink's group presentations. Industry observers noted it, and whether intentional or not, it planted a question in the minds of those watching closely. Was Lisa beginning to define herself on her own terms? Tension point 1. The Crazy Horse controversy. In October 2023, Lisa performed a series of shows at the Crazy Horse Paris, a cabaret venue with an international reputation built on sophisticated artistic performance. The venue has hosted collaborations with major artists before, and Lisa's residency there was framed as an artistic project. The reaction from portions of the Korean public and entertainment media was swift and severe. Korean tabloids and online forums, which have historically served as powerful amplifiers of public opinion around idols, published critical commentary questioning whether the performance was appropriate for someone in Lisa's position in the industry. Several conservative Korean media outlets framed the performances as a departure from the image standards expected of a K-pop idol. The criticism was gendered, culturally specific, and, to many Western observers, deeply revealing of the double standards operating within the industry. It is worth noting what was not happening in those critiques. They were not legal challenges. They were not official statements from YG Entertainment. They were expressions of a cultural expectation. The expectation that a K-pop idol's image remains within certain boundaries. Boundaries defined not by law, but by the consensus of an industry and its most invested audience segments. Lisa responded not with public statements of defense, but with what she did next. She kept performing. She completed the residency, and within months, she would make an announcement that signaled far more clearly than any public response where she intended to take her career. Tension point 2. The contract negotiation and the birth of Lude. In early 2023, all 4 members of Blackpink entered contract renewal negotiations with YG Entertainment. It was widely reported to be one of the most closely watched contract cycles in K-pop history. The industry, fans, and financial analysts observed carefully because the outcome would signal something larger about the power balance between a new generation of globally successful idols and the companies that had built them. All 4 members ultimately renewed with YG for group activities. But according to multiple industry reports, the structure of those renewals was notably different from their previous contracts. LALISA, along with at least one other member, is reported to have negotiated significantly expanded, or in some respects fully independent, rights over individual activities and solo projects. The clearest indication of what this meant in practice came in 2023, when LALISA announced the founding of LOUD, her own entertainment company, established independently of YG Entertainment. LOUD, operating with an international footprint, would serve as the management and creative home for LALISA's solo career. It was, structurally, an extraordinary move. In K-pop's history, individual members establishing their own independent entertainment companies while still contractually affiliated with their original agency for group activities is uncommon, and when it occurs, it rarely passes without commentary. Industry insiders noted at the time that LALISA's ability to negotiate this arrangement was itself a measure of her leverage. She had reached a level of individual commercial value that made her, effectively, too significant to lose. YG needed Blackpink, and Blackpink, in much of the global market, was commercially inseparable from LALISA. But leverage is not immunity, and the establishment of LOUD did not occur in a vacuum of goodwill. Industry commentators in Seoul noted, carefully but unmistakably, that LALISA's autonomy, while commercially understandable, represented a structural challenge to the group loyalty model that the Korean entertainment industry had been built upon. If LALISA could negotiate this, the question became, who else would follow? Tension point 3. The relationship question. K-pop's dating restrictions have been under public scrutiny for years. Multiple idols have faced significant audience backlash after relationships became known. In some documented cases, fan organizations have coordinated responses, streaming boycotts, the cancellation of fan meetings, following relationship revelations. The industry, broadly, has designed its commercial model around a kind of aspirational availability that romantic disclosure disrupts. In this context, the public emergence of LALISA's relationship with Frédéric Arnault, a French business executive and the son of LVMH founder Bernard Arnault, one of the wealthiest individuals in the world, was observed carefully by K-pop analysts. The relationship was not formally announced by either party, but became acknowledged through a combination of public sightings, social media activity, and, eventually, appearances together that made further ambiguity implausible. The reaction, compared to historical K-pop relationship disclosures, was notably measured within Korean media. Several commentators suggested the circumstances were different: LALISA's independence through LOUD, her international profile, and the identity of her partner, whose family's commercial empire intersects with luxury fashion brands deeply embedded in K-pop's promotional and aesthetic infrastructure, may have altered the usual calculus. But the underlying tension is real, regardless of its immediate consequences. The industry's implicit expectation that idols maintain a kind of emotional vacancy for the benefit of fan investment does not disappear because one artist is powerful enough to sidestep its most visible repercussions. It simply reveals who the rules apply to, and who has moved beyond their reach. Tension point 4. Hollywood, Las Vegas, and the westward pivot. The most structurally significant tension point may not be any single event, but the cumulative direction of LALISA's solo career since the founding of LOUD. Her casting in the third season of HBO's acclaimed drama series The White Lotus, one of the most prestigious international television productions of recent years, placed her in a creative context entirely removed from the K-pop industry's ecosystem. The White Lotus is not a fan service vehicle. It is not an idol-adjacent project. It is an Emmy-winning drama series with a global prestige reputation, and LALISA's appearance in it was the kind of career signal that crosses cultural divides in ways that no streaming chart position can fully replicate. Her Las Vegas residency, Viva LALISA, at Caesar's Palace, followed a different but equally significant trajectory. Las Vegas residencies are, in the Western entertainment economy, a marker of sustained mainstream commercial viability. They are extended, high-investment commitments that sit at the intersection of performance and brand permanence. For a Southeast Asian woman who entered the American market through the filter of a Korean pop group, establishing an independent headlining residency in Las Vegas is not a symbolic gesture. It is a structural repositioning. Combined with a reported film and television development pipeline under LOUD, including projects with major streaming platforms, and additional acting engagements, the picture LALISA is constructing is one of a career that no longer requires the K-pop industry as its primary infrastructure. She can use it selectively. She can return to Blackpink. But the dependency that once ran in one direction only, artist to company, idol to label, has been renegotiated into something far more bilateral. And that, historically, is when industries get nervous. Act 3. The bigger picture. Let's step back from the specific details of Lisa's career and ask a different kind of question. Is what we're watching, one artist's negotiated departure from the norms of her industry, an anomaly? Or is it the visible edge of something larger? The K-pop industry is, in historical terms, remarkably young. Its global phase, the period in which Korean pop acts began consistently charting in Western markets and drawing mainstream international audiences, is barely a decade old. The industry that spent decades engineering compliance, image control, and parasocial dependency suddenly found itself operating on a world stage where those tools function differently. Western audiences are not socialized into K-pop's behavioral expectations. They do not share the cultural framework that makes a relationship revelation a commercial crisis. They do not apply the same evaluative standards that Korean audiences bring to idol conduct. When Lisa performed in Paris and Western media reported on it, the dominant frame was not idol violates norms. It was artist explores creative expression. Same event. Entirely different reception. This divergence creates a structural problem for K-pop companies that have spent the last decade expanding globally while maintaining domestically calibrated control mechanisms. The behavioral frameworks that protect commercial value in Seoul can actively undermine commercial value in Los Angeles. An artist whose management structure prohibits public relationships is, from a Western entertainment industry perspective, operating under conditions that have no parallel in mainstream American or European show business. Lisa is not the first K-pop artist to recognize this tension and begin navigating it deliberately. Several members of BTS, arguably the most successful K-pop act in history, have spoken publicly, and at times with evident frustration, about the pressures of the idol system, particularly as they aged into their mid to late 20s, and the system's expectations began to conflict with their personal lives. Jennie, Lisa's Blackpink groupmate, established her own independent company, OA. Around the same period, Lisa founded Loud. These are not isolated decisions. They are data points in a pattern. What Lisa's situation contributes to this pattern is a dimension that most other comparable cases do not contain. She is not Korean. She is Thai. She built her career inside a system that was not designed for her, navigated cultural expectations that were not hers by origin, and achieved a level of commercial success that gave her the leverage to begin rewriting the terms of her participation. In that arc, there is something that resonates beyond the K-pop industry's specific geography. It is the story of someone who was admitted into a powerful system on the condition that she adapt to it, and who, having mastered that system completely, began using its own commercial logic to expand the space available to her. That kind of story, the outsider who earns enough power to reshape the institution from within, is not new in entertainment history. It has played out in Hollywood, in the global music industry, in fashion. What makes it notable in Lisa's case is the speed, and the scale, and the very particular nature of the system she is operating within. K-pop's idol architecture was designed, among other objectives, to produce artists who are replaceable enough to be managed, dependent enough to be controlled, and beloved enough to generate revenue indefinitely. Lisa, at this point in her career, does not fit that design criteria on a single one of those dimensions. She is not replaceable to Blackpink's global commercial brand. She is not financially or creatively dependent on YG Entertainment, and the audience she commands internationally is not contingent on her compliance with the system's behavioral requirements. What does this mean for the K-pop industry more broadly? Analysts who track the global expansion of Korean entertainment have begun to describe what some call a renegotiation era, a period in which the first generation of genuinely international K-pop megastars are moving beyond the contractual and behavioral frameworks designed at their debuts and into positions of sufficient commercial power to demand and receive fundamentally different terms. If that reading is accurate, Lisa is not an outlier. She is a preview. The question of whether K-pop's foundational architecture, its training systems, its image controls, its behavioral restrictions, its parasocial economics, can survive genuine globalization without fundamental structural revision is one the industry has not yet fully answered. Lisa's career, in its current form, is asking that question louder and more publicly than almost anyone in the same position. And the industry, for all of its commercial discipline, does not yet have a clean answer. We have covered a great deal of ground: the system that produced her, the norms she quietly began to challenge, the specific moments that crystallized that tension into something visible and consequential, and the larger question of what it all means for an industry navigating the distance between where it came from and where global ambition is taking it. But here is the question this story has not yet answered. Lisa, at the time of this video, is still a member of Blackpink. She still carries a group affiliation with YG Entertainment. The Blackpink project, however reconfigured by individual pursuits and renegotiated contracts, is not over. And at some point, those two identities, the international solo artist building a career with genuine Hollywood-level infrastructure, and the K-pop idol who remains, contractually and commercially, part of one of the world's most valuable pop group brands, will have to fully reckon with each other. What happens when that reckoning arrives? If the history of the K-pop industry tells us anything, it is that the tension between individual ambition and collective commercial architecture rarely resolves quietly. And Lisa's story, still unfolding, still building, has not yet reached its most consequential chapter. If you want to understand the full business architecture behind the industry she is in the process of reshaping, the next video is essential. Because in the end, the most important question here is not whether Lisa broke the rules. It is whether, in breaking them, she has begun to write new ones.